right, and we are live from Cloud Next 2025, everybody. Welcome back to another stream, and a special guest. We always have special guests, but we have even more special guests today. We have two members of the Firebase team who have made the magic of Genkit happen, which I'm thrilled about because I've been interested in Genkit for a while. They're helping to discern what agents, how we can work agents. And so before we get too deep into the live coding, which we will do, don't worry, I just want to start with a real simple question, like, what is Genkit?
Thank you so much for asking. And hi, everyone. Happy to be on this live stream. So Genkit is a open source AI framework built by the Firebase team at Google, intended to make it easier for developers to build AI-powered features, agents, agentic applications, and generally just integrate intelligence and the latest AI models into your applications so that you can build the next generation of interesting use cases for your apps and for your users.
Powerful stuff. And you are the PM of that.
Yes, sir. I am the lead PM.
And maybe we should do introductions as well. So you are.
So yeah, I'm Chris. I'm the lead PM for Genkit. I've been with it since the beginning, and it's been really exciting to see how it's grown over time, how users have used it, and I'm really excited for our future as we expand. Michael, do you want to go?
Sure. I am an engineering lead on the Firebase, and I got sort of sucked more and more into Genkit. Honestly, it's just kind of fun to work on and work with, but also I think that it really does sort of help people, come to grips with all of the crazy new stuff that's always happening with Gen AI.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been fun to work with and watch grow. Like I am still Aaron Wanjala. I am a Java developer advocate, but today we're all Genkit folks. And speaking of, I just want to get into what you've got here, Michael. It just feels like this product has grown so much, so quickly, as a lot of other AI done recently. So I'm excited for what we're gonna show today. Why don't you take us away?
Yeah, so Genkit is obviously open source, as Chris said. So github.com/firebase/Genkit is a good place to start. And Genkit, as an open source framework, one of the most important things is that it is sort of fully extensible and agnostic to model providers. So out of the box, we for Google's Gemini models, of course, which are fantastic. I mean, Gemini 2.5 Pro especially has been my favorite model lately. But we also support things like Imagen, so you can do image generation in addition to text prompts. And there are third-party plugins for providers from OpenAI, Anthropic, models from Meta, Mistral, Olama, if you're doing sort of self-hosted or even local.
It really is shocking how little it is required to get started to work in like a really intuitive way. Oh, we have a message in. Hi, Edward. Let us know, where are you calling in? Where are you tuning in from? And have you tried Genkit? Because one of the first things I noticed when I tried it was how intuitive the idea of like a flow is, and how easy coming up to getting started that would be in that neighborhood. But yeah, that's a great start to just get on all of the models with so little code. Where does that take us?
Really glad that you pointed out how compact those code samples are. When we were designing Genkit, our goal was more started with Genkit than it was with model. Right? You're using, the Gemini SDK or the OpenAI SDK or the Claude or Anthropic SDK. We want start with Genkit to be more or less not even shorter and more intuitive, right? And then from there, make it very easy, much more complex output tool. Demo, so to get a little bit more into some of the advanced that we support.
So this is Genkit by example, which you can find at examples.genkit.dev. And this is basically just a of just really practical, here's how you do a thing with Genkit examples. So, this thing is just a simple chat where I can say, how's it going? And using Gemini 2 to Flash, so it's super fast. I can also customize the system message, so I could say, like a pirate, which is always a popular one for AIs. Tell me a story.
Okay. And is the streaming this well?
Yeah, so Genkit supports text content and structured content. If you look at the code for this, this is just a line of code to start up a chat where it returns client shows up. So it really does get pretty simple when you get down to it.
Yeah.
But it was important to us. It's going to generate a big blob of text, but data. So you need to be able to build an interface around the output, and text, other than just maybe like markdown heading, is not necessarily the richest format for output. So Genkit has really and so here's an example structure that we've output scheme.
Well, we had a live stream coincidentally last season that was all about using training Gemini on D for us. So I don't know how this happened, if it's just serendipitous, but we had a lot of Dungeons and Dragons samples floating around.
It's easy to go to because it sort of lets you show off the model quickly out of it. So let's see. Chris, what kind of character should we build here?
I think we should do a valiant developer. You come up with this valiant. Let's give it more detail.
Let's say we are chaotic neutral.
Ooh.
So we have no idea, due to their alignment, what kind of code they're going to generate. Whether it's well tested.
Kind of sounds like an LLM, honestly.
Yeah.
All right, let's see what happens here. I'm gonna hit generate character. Are streaming in as they're generated.
Wow.
And we have Linus the Loopy.
That's an amazing name.
Rock gnome wizard. It caught the chaotic neutral here. And let's see, look at Linus is a brilliant coder, but struggles with documentation and adherence. I mean, don't we all really?
It's fantastic.
And so, if you want to look at this, so this is all script. But actually, Chris, you should probably talk for a moment about what we announced today, or was it today? Yeah, it was today.
Yeah. No, it was actually this morning. I think Michael's pulling up the blog post, but so Genkit is supporting or actually our Node.js support, which is what we've been showing so far. GA just I think a little bit over a month ago, so that's relatively new. And when I say GA, I really mean that we created a stable release that's ready for production usage. So if you're a developer and you're trying to get the latest AI capabilities into your apps and put it in production today, you can do that.
Okay.
Up until today, it was in, which means mostly for experimentation for the developer.
You're getting ahead of the curve.
In the open source project, right? We want folks early feedback. so that we can make sure we keep up with the latest trends in the AI ecosystem and serve developers as best we can. The new exciting news, Genkit Go beta status. So it's not Genkit for Node.js, but it's just stable to go here. Expect few breaking changes or breaking changes less often. So if you want to start building your app or using Genkit for Go, absolutely consider that if you are a gopher, or that's what they call, right?
Yeah.
Gopher, right?
Well, congratulations. That's exciting, of course, for you and the team, but also for our audience. Like, if you are interested, if you're a Go developer, like, it's still a good time, because I feel that's the benefit of trying these new frameworks as they're forming. I, as a developer, like to be able to weigh in on something that I see value in, but I want to have. And you still have that. We're just very much like, developing as we go. And like, that's why I love the open source aspect, because no one person, no company has a monopoly on good ideas, right? And so we're embracing that, and I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I'm like really proud of how the API over time. Like, in the blog post, we chose an example with structured output. Go tends Pro, you have a lot of control.
Yeah.
But we still wanted to try to take on the challenge of making working with AI feel as simple and as compact as possible, right, within the Go ecosystem. So I'm very happy with how like the structured output sample turned out, how easy it is to define like the schema you want with a struct. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how Genkit Go works?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously because Go is completely strongly typed, which, in JavaScript we use the Zod library to provide sort of runtime type schemas, because even though we love TypeScript, we use TypeScript, once the code's actually running, there's no access to any of those that type information. And so Zod sort of gives you an ability to define a TypeScript type and a runtime type at the same time. In Go, we don't have that problem. We can just define a type, and it's available at compile time, but it is also something that you can run reflection on. And so you can sort of introspect and understand the shape of something sort of while you're running. And so because of that, here we have an RPG character with name, backstory, and abilities. And all we have to do is say that here in our output, let's see. Yeah, all we say is that, like, hey, response.output, we're going to marshal that into a character that is of that type struct, and using the nice Go marshalling abilities that are built in with like adding JSON names to things. That basically tells the model, hey, generate JSON that fits this struct, and then automatically marshal that data into the struct. And so like now this is strongly typed, and we can say character.name, and it just works.
And so that's what we mean by structured output. We can take an LLM response and fit it into these kinds of structures and harness the full language of both the model and the strongly typed language to produce exactly what we want on the other end of like an API.
Yep.
Wow.
I think that's critical, right? Like, so I mean, chatbots are of course really exciting, but I think a lot of developer use cases need more than just an unstructured string, right? Oftentimes, especially if you're trying to create UI components, like Michael showed off on examples, or Genkit by example, you need to have reliable structured output. And it's really great that the latest models, like the Gemini models, for example, have the ability to guarantee adherence to that output schema, right? So you don't need to worry nearly as much about whether or not the model will forget a field or wrap it in, so like the code ticks,
or it can be close to what you want but not quite there.
Yeah, exactly.
That is huge, because I feel like as a Java developer, I can spend about half my life serializing, deserializing, properly, defining API endpoints and types and things like that. So for the ability to get support like that out of the box while working with these different models, with, as you say, like I like the explicit nature of languages like Go and Java, because it lets me know that I'm doing exactly what I need to be doing. But with frameworks like Genkit, it's making a lot of reasonable choices for me under the hood. I don't need to, like, getting started with these models out of Vertex. It's possible, but it requires a lot more like code that isn't about the decisions I'm trying to make with my project. So this really seems like it's getting the boilerplate of getting the models working and getting my data types right out of the way, so I can really just focus on building something.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is exciting. I'd like to. It's making me just want to try building something honestly today.
Yeah, we should start doing that. So, although Chris, you skipped over Python.
Well, I hadn't skipped over it yet. I was getting to it. I wanted to start with Go because that's been part of our journey for a while now, right? So I'm really excited that we're finally able to push it forward and get it to that next level of stability. The other very exciting news is that we've expanded Genkit's language support to one of the most popular language for generative AI use cases, Python. Right, we started with JavaScript or with JavaScript/TypeScript initially because that was super popular among Firebase developers. Of course, it's the language of the web, right? But you can't build a framework without Python support.
No, not an AI framework. I love Python. I started using Firebase and Python. I'm glad we started there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Python has to be not only invited, but a first party, like a first class kind of priority. So that makes sense. Yeah, so I'm excited to see what we've got here.
Yeah, and just sort of talking about that sort of like easy to get started experience. I think that one of the things that comes out of the box, like this is a tool calling example, for instance. So you define a function, you put this annotation on it that turns that into a Genkit tool. This one turns it into a Genkit flow, which we can talk about this a little bit more in a bit. But here you just pass this tool in and say like, hey model, this is a tool that's available to you. And then the models all have what's called function calling built into it, which is essentially the model gets a list of things that it can call, and it says like, okay, here are the names of different functions, here's the JSON schema for their parameters, and you as the model can decide, hey, do I want to call this or not? And by default, when you're using sort of like the provider SDK to come out of the box, that tool calling loop is something where it's like you call the LLM, you look at the response, you pull out the function calls, you then look at the parameters and everything, and then you decide to call some code that you wrote that matches that function. But with something like Genkit, that's all just baked in. So it's what we call the tool calling loop, which is essentially that by providing this tool function to the generate call, then if the LLM decides to call that tool, we will automatically just execute that function that you wrote, take the response, and then send it back to the LLM for another turn and say like, hey, you wanted to call this function, here's the response of that function, what do you want to do now? And so it's sort of the basics of that, of things like structured output and tool use that really end up consuming kind of a lot of time if you're just sort of at the lowest level. I mean, and obviously there are lots of different AI frameworks that do this as well, but those basics are really important and kind of end up being table stakes for doing something that feels really intuitive.
Absolutely, and I've tried tool calling in other frameworks, and while it's becoming very table stakes, it unlocks a lot of functionality.
Yeah,
it is another it feels like another step change in what you can do in a maintainable way.
Fundamentally, it's essentially how it's one of the simplest ways that you can give models agency, right? And kind of turn them into what we think of as agents.
Yes.
Right? Because if everything is predetermined by the developer, and you're always retrieving data from this database before you invoke an LLM call, right? And then you're always processing the output of the LLM call in a specific way. That's very different than what you're able to do. You allow the LLM to dynamically be able to choose what needs to happen to accomplish a particular goal, right? Yeah. That opens up a lot of new avenues for the capabilities of these models.
Absolutely. Without that agency, it feels more like a pipeline. It feels like you're defining a path and you're letting the data fly down it. But it is that opening up the ability for it to decide in an ambiguous way, decide its way around an ambiguous obstacle that makes it novel and useful here. So, yeah, what have we got here? Is this a tool calling sample with dice rolls?
Yeah, so this is another of our Genkit by example, and it just does show sort of how that works. So I prompted it here with roll a dice. If it's over 3, check the weather in New York. Otherwise, check the weather in Las Vegas. And this is actually something that I think is kind of interesting. So everybody knows LLMs are non-deterministic, right? So you put in the same thing, you get 2 different results depending on how you call it. But they are not always as non-deterministic as you'd like them to be. So if I say generate a contact with a name, like first name, last name, email address, something like that. If I just run that, and then I run it again, or I run it 10 times, 3 or 4 of those times, it's actually going to end up being the same thing. And so sometimes the LLM does not return output that's as random as you want, because if you're like, well, I wanted to generate a bunch of random different names, then you don't get that. And so a technique that I'll use sometimes, which is this is a baby version of this, but you actually seed randomness into the prompt that you send. So you might say something you might have generate a big list of states and cities or something like that. And then when you're prompting, you say generate generate a person that lives, pick random thing from array. And so by changing the prompt and injecting that little bit of randomness, the LLM ends up generating more different and more diverse things.
Right.
And so you can combine that with sometimes when I'm doing these kinds of things, I'll build up 6 or 7 different lists of random things, and then I'm just it's a random person who lives in this state with this occupation, is this old, and has this as a hobby, and those are all random things. But then the LLM can sort of intelligently take that on and say okay, I'm going to write a personal backstory for this imaginary person who has all of these specific traits. And so it's combining just programmatic randomness with the non-determinism of the LLM.
That is fascinating, and that's a good practice point. I had never heard of the idea of seeding randomness into a prompt to make it kind of think through each response. I've never tried that.
So here in the tool calling, I'm saying roll dice. If it's over 3, check in one location. If it's under, check in another. And that shows how you can do sort of sequential tool calling, and the LLM sort of remembers enough to keep it going. So first it calls and says roll a dice. That result comes back as 2. Then it keeps reasoning. This is that tool loop I was talking about. It says, okay, the dice roll was 2, which is not over 3, so I'm going to check the weather in Las Vegas because that's what you originally told me to do if it wasn't over 3. And so, this is really that core sort of agentic capability of LLMs, which is, everybody argues about the definition of an agent, right?
Yes.
You say, what is an agent? You get 100,000 different definitions. The one that I like the best is an agent is a program where an AI model is involved in the control flow of the application. So what that means is, it's sort of exactly what you were talking about with the pipeline, right?
Yeah.
If the LLM doesn't ever fork a path based on the actual reasoning that it's doing, then that's not an agent, that's a pipeline.
No, yeah.
But as soon as you introduce these tools and you say hey, LLM, I'm going to give you some input. Here's some tools you can use. I don't know if you're going to need to use them or not because it depends on the input. And so once the LLM is sort of making that choice about which tool to use or which path to take, that to me is what defines an agent versus a non-agentic LLM thing.
I like that definition too. I do want to say hi to our viewer in Brazil. Thanks for joining in. And I really identify with everybody has a personal definition of agents, and control flow is a good discerning factor. I've heard agency, ambiguity. There's something in there, and I think it also is going to depend on which organization, what you're trying to use your agents for. No, and it's a good concise sample for tool calling too. It's something that I've seen many frameworks try to define and try to give samples for. And this is concrete enough to be here is you using it, rather than just being it's a function. You can use functions. And gesturing towards what a tool could be. I do like this kind of workable sample.
And I will call out that I think GetWeather is probably the single most popular tool that is used as an example for whatever reason. But we threw that in there, but also a dice roll, which is a little more interesting.
Also, kind of Vegas themed.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we are in Las Vegas, so rolling the dice is great. How's my live stream going? Roll that dice. Tell me.
So is higher better, or what's the?
Oh no!
Lower was better. I think that's what we decided.
Everyone's a critic.
There we go. We can just tell it's LLMs are very impressionable.
Yeah, they must be confused. Hello, Zachary. Welcome to the stream. Is there anything you want to learn about agents or Genkit? Let us know. I'm curious about the human in the loop sample we have there.
I was just about to ask about that.
Yeah.
So, human in the loop, I work with this stuff so much that I kind of lose touch with what are terms that make sense to normal people and what are just very opaque industry terms that I'm just saying as if everyone should understand it. But human in the loop is essentially the idea of, the same way that we talked about that tool calling loop. Human in the loop is where through some non-deterministic process, the LLM ends up deciding hey, I need to actually go back to the user and ask them a question, or I need to, get approval before I, refund $5,000 to this customer who is asking for a refund.
And that's an important part of what people are wondering when they're signing on to agentic workflows. They're like, but how do I know if it's right? How do I get it to check in with me and work with me? Not just do something for me, but let me in on the magic and let me sign off on it before it happens. So this is a hot topic.
Yeah, and so we actually, our mechanism for this in Genkit is built on top of tool calling. So we have special types of tools called interrupts. And an interrupt is basically a special kind of tool where the LLM sees it the same as any other tool. But when the LLM calls it, rather than sort of continuing in that loop and going back to the LLM again, it halts the loop and goes back to the developer, and then the developer can decide what to do. So here in this example, we have this ask question interrupt that says, use this to directly ask the user a question. The user will see a custom form with the options. The response to this function call will be the user's answer. And so the LLM can see that and say, oh, I see, if I need to ask the user a question, I can call this tool. And it doesn't have to know how it works, but it just knows that eventually it's going to get a response of some kind. And so in this example, the default system prompt here is you're a trivia game host, and the user's going to suggest a subject. So I could say, I don't know, what's a trivia topic we should go for?
Google history.
Yes.
Okay. Google history. Before it was known as Google, the original name of the search engine developed by Larry Page and Sergey Brin.
That was a good one. Does anybody in the chat know? We're probably gonna answer before you respond. But I just wonder how well known this is as a trivia fact.
I think I know the answer, but I'm a little nervous. I'm not 100% sure.
You'll be our audience stand-in. This is for all the marbles, Chris.
Let's go.
Okay. PageRank? I mean, that's the name of the algorithm, isn't it?
Let's give it a try.
There's no way it's backrub, right?
It's close, but not quite. The correct answer is
backrub?
Yes, that is correct.
I'm shocked by that too. I thought it was PageRank.
No, it was originally called backrub, and I don't remember why. Honestly, why was it called backrub? Let's just interrupt the LLM and see. Oop. Oh, okay. Well, sometimes the LLM isn't as impressionable as you think.
Folks, that's how you know it's real. It's just we did not stage the sample for you. That's interesting though.
Yeah, and so this is just a simple example, but all I did is provide a single tool and then give it some guidance about how that tool is supposed to be used,
right.
And it sort of creates this interactive quiz show thing, and it's a lot of building with Gen AI I've found is. It's not so much that any piece of it is hard, it's that there are so many different things that you have to understand, and then you have to figure out which 2 or 3 things of the 20 different things that exist need to be put together for this use case to work.
And so I just have to ask a little bit about that. I love that. Like, I love that it is just composing things that already exist, right? You're able to like make so much more that's right for your use case or what's already there. But I'm wondering, for something like this interrupt, where you're doing the trivia game, is this reusing like an already built like question and answer tool, or was that just like it gleaned that you're going to need some way to answer a question from that prompt?
So yeah, so this is defined in the code right here. So you can see I have AI.define interrupt, and I give it the name of ask question. And so like it's, 5 lines of code here that lets me define the interrupt tool that says like, hey, we're going to have a question and some answers. And actually, I guess it's a little bit more because we have to provide the schema as well. Again, using Zod for that. But like, this doesn't have to be ask question. This could be request approval. This could be, basically interrupts are also good for things that are potentially like long running or require some kind of out of band action. So it's like, kick off this job, and it's not going to like respond right away necessarily, but it's going to like go off and do the thing. And then the developer has control again to be able to say like, okay, knowing that it kicked off this job, like how do I need to proceed from here?
No, that's amazing.
So yeah, I mean that's I think we've gone through some of the basics. I feel like we should start live coding.
Let's do it. Let's make something of this. I feel like just watching that makes me want to like run a game jam where you just do things with like human in the loop interrupts, like a human in the loop interrupt centric game jam. I feel like there's so much you can do there.
Okay, so I have VS Code here, and what I was sort of planning for today is one of the things that lots of people have been playing with lately is the Gemini 2.0 Flash experimental image generation. That's one of the things that's like really caught a lot of people.
It's fun.
It is fun.
It's a lot of fun.
And so my idea here, and I don't know how far we'll get. I don't know how well it'll go, but I thought, why don't we build like a choose your own adventure story generator where it'll generate like the pages of the story and an image to go along with it, and then you pick where you want the story to go next.
I like it.
So let's see here. I've set up a pretty much empty Next.js app here with just a couple things. I've initialized Genkit with the Google AI plugin. I've set the Gemini API key environment variable so that gets up and running. And I've just sort of done this the way that I like to structure these apps. This is a Next.js app router app. And so let's start with flows. So I'm going to create a start adventure.
Yeah. So what is a flow for the audience?
Chris, why don't you take that while I do a little vibe coding here with Gemini Code Assistant?
All right. So flows are a really fundamental concept in Genkit. And when we looked at like examples or Genkit by example, we saw like Genkit endpoint, which are ultimately a wrapper around a flow in a lot of cases. So a flow is essentially the container where you're going to put all of your Genkit logic, right? Because oftentimes when you deploy an AI-powered API endpoint, right, that you can call from your app client, it's usually going to be more than making like a single generation request to a model, right? You probably want to have maybe some capability to filter the inputs, right? To make sure that maybe the question the user is asking is appropriate, right? Yeah. Or maybe you might have some routing logic where if the question pertains to this topic or this topic, it invokes kind of a different code path.
Absolutely.
Right? Or have some logic at the end that's going to filter the output of the LLM call or aggregate multiple responses from separate LLM calls. Basically, there's a lot of custom logic, right, beyond just a single call to the LLM that you might have ultimately in your AI-powered API endpoint or AI-powered feature. So all of that logic can be contained inside a flow, and flows also provide a few other benefits. You can think of them essentially as special functions, but with at least in Node.js, and we kind of have this concept in a different way in the other language ecosystems. You can provide a input schema for full end-to-end type safety, and you can also I think Michael will probably demo this in just a little bit, but you can also open up a flow in the developer UI, which is a local first debugging / assistive tool that we give you.
I hope we can see that at some point. That is a nice one.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that nice defined input schema gives you a nice UI to be able to quickly test your flows. And then when you deploy them, you use that input schema to define the actual shape of the input for the deployed API endpoint. And we also provide a few integrations for things like Express. If you're deploying them to Cloud Run, right, your flows to Cloud Run, or integrations for Cloud Functions for Firebase, including integrations with Firebase authentication and app check. Okay. If you want to make sure you have a protected API endpoint that you can then use like a really nice Firebase Cloud Functions for Firebase client SDKs to be able to call ergonomically from your client app.
So now I'm checking things off, and so we're doing integration with the models out of the box with Genkit. We're doing a whole bunch of the boilerplate to get started. We're doing function calling, and we're also doing authentication. We're doing it feels like we have a lot of busy work aspects of building an app with Firebase. Making the decisions that you're trying to make with the model's output is getting simplified and kind of taken off the table.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, Genkit, and this is actually fairly recent, is now just Genkit, right? It's not Firebase Genkit. But what I want the listeners to understand, especially if they're big Firebase fans, is that we provide some excellent integration through Firebase, through the Firebase plugin, right? So if you want all the goodness that Firebase gives you when it comes to deploying a cloud function, right, that you can easily call from your app in a secure way with Firebase App Check, with Firebase Auth, that might, especially for your AI features, if you're invoking specific tools, for example, it helps to have a framework that makes it easy for you to incorporate that auth information into your AI logic so that maybe only certain users can invoke certain tools, right? Or maybe they can only access the data that they are privileged to, right? From your app's database.
Yeah, if you don't need full RBAC, that feels like a much easier implementation than just being if you can just say, check if they have this status.
Yeah, exactly. So flows essentially operate as that top level concept that we can use to integrate into all these different services, right? That you can wrap all of your custom AI logic around to a nice unit. And then when you run it in the developer UI, or even when you run it in production, it gives you a way to aggregate the traces for all the fun magic that's happening within that flow. So you can really easily step through everything you generated, every tool you called, see the traces for that, both locally and in production.
The traces, that's another big win, where you're not just doing something with these models. You know that you're what you're doing, what the outputs are, the timing of each of these requests, composing multimodal responses, and knowing how this one is performing, how slow this is, how much more value the response is providing. That is another a huge benefit of working with a framework like this that feels more mature than just doing it yourself or rolling your own kind of service to work with these models. I think you and I have we've gone off into our own discussion while Michael's creating here. What are we up to here?
All right.
So yeah, so I started here and I prompted Gemini with, I'm building a choose your own adventure game. Let's make a Genkit flow that generates the first page for the game. It should generate narrative text and markdown up to 4 choices and description. And so yeah, Gemini Code Assist got me started. Now I do want to be clear here. I have this rules.md. I'm cheating a little, but not a lot here. So lots of AI systems have these sort of rules that you can supply. Gemini Code Assist doesn't have that built in yet, but you can @mention files, and so I just write a rules file for myself whenever I'm working on a project, and then I include it in the first prompt, and so that allows me to sort of set the tone for how I want the rest of it to go. And so
are you using AI to write your AI?
Oh yeah, definitely. Got to do that, right?
Why not double dip?
And so what it generated here is we have a generate adventure start flow, which I don't know the name of that actually. I'm just going to call this
And you know, you mentioned the rules.md. I don't know if we have something like that, but we do have the style guide. Does that a similar bit of functionality?
I'm not sure. I'm
Yeah,
not familiar with the style
I think
guide.
that's actually a very new feature where you can define, like, in a .gemini folder in the root of a main application. I might actually be just describing a function of the Gemini for Code Assist agent, where GitHub repo, if you have a .gemini/style guide file, you can define a style guide and have it adhere to that for every commit in your repo.
Oh, nice.
So maybe that's not across the rest of it, but it is there.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
All right, so I hinted to this a bunch of times because it's one of my favorite things that Genkit does. I think this is if I had to call out one thing that really differentiates Genkit, right, from all the other AI frameworks out there, it's our local first tooling and seamless integration with the developer UI. This just makes it so much easier to accelerate your inner dev loop, test the things that you've built, and iteratively go from your prototype to something that's actually worthy of production.
Right.
Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing in the dev UI right now?
Yeah, definitely. So in my code, where'd my code go? It's around here somewhere. There we go. I have my input schema and my output schema for this flow. The input schema takes a theme, which is the theme of the story that I want to tell. And Gemini decided that's what it should have. I didn't pick that, but that's great. And then the output schema gives me some narrative text, some choices, an image description, and an image URL. And so when I define a flow, I can start up, I'll stop it and start it again. But I've written a script in my package.json that runs Genkit start. So Genkit has a CLI that comes baked in with it that can start up the dev UI. You give it a command, and then you say, like, this is the code that I want to run to load up the things that are going to show up. And so then over in my dev UI, then I can actually go and look, and there's that flow, and I can just run it. And so this is the only thing that's in here right now. Actually, it's not the only thing that's in here because we also have models. So when you install a plugin to Genkit, that will automatically register models in a lot of cases, or it can also register tools or retrievers or other things that Genkit supports. And then those just sort of instantly show up in the dev UI as something that you can play around with. So here you can see I've got a variety of Google AI models, and that is because I installed the Google AI plugin.
All right.
And so I can take any of these, let's say, Gemini 2.0 Pro preview and say, generate a Fibonacci sequence in TypeScript.
By the way, folks, the internet is slow, not the models. I just want to clarify.
We are in a hall with tens of thousands of people, so.
Here, maybe I'll switch to Flash for.
And does this view actually give us the timing stats as well when we're trying things out?
I can show you that as well.
Okay. That's always been one of my favorite things because I've had situations in the past where we're in the idea stage, we're prototyping something, we decide to try out a model for a solution, and then we get to the end of it, we get it implemented, and you realize that it's just too slow. The response rate was just never in the range of a solution. So this is a good way to preempt that.
Yeah, and so this is our model playground, which allows you to just sort of run any prompt you want against the model. And here you can see it generated a whole lot of stuff, actually, when I just told it to generate a Fibonacci sequence. But to what you were talking about, I can go to the traces view, and this shows me.
Are we able to zoom in there? There's a lot of goodness on that table.
Yeah, so let's zoom in. And this shows me, obviously you can see I was playing around with this a little before, but this shows me sort of like the traces that have been running, because every time the Genkit flows are sort of fully instrumented so that every step that they take gets registered as a trace, and then you can inspect that later. So for this Fibonacci sequence thing that I just ran, we can see that it took 7.91 seconds. We can see what the input was. We can see what it output. And I can do the same thing for the flow that was generated from my app. So if I go to Start Adventure, you can see that there are two separate generate calls. The first one says, generate a starting scene for, and then it gives me the theme that I had in line in the text, because that's what got sent to the model. That took 2.17 seconds. That gets sent to Gemini 2.0 Flash, and then it says generate an image for that, and that gets sent to the experimental model that supports response modalities of text and image, which allows it to generate that image for me. And one of my favorite things about the WI, this is a feature that just is really handy when you're working with multimedia, is you can see here the output is candidates, media, content, media, and then base64 encoded media, see below. And so if I just scroll down, I can actually see the image that was generated. That was just base64 encoded by the model, but we detected in the tools that, like, hey, that's a base64 encoded image, so let's pull that out and show that separately instead of just showing you a bunch of garbage text.
That is so much easier than, like, because my alternative would be like, pull down the API, try it out in something like Postman or Insomnia, and that's great. Like, those are great tools, but there is a night and day difference here. I'm with you, Chris, where this is the best way to work locally on something like this. Because having the timing there, having the tracing. I saw there was an export. There was like a way to show it in the Firebase console. Does that mean that these are open telemetry traces that are pre-instrumented for you?
Sorry, ask the question one more time.
I saw that there was a way to show the traces in Firebase console. Does that mean that this is outputting like open telemetry traces that I could take into the rest of my app and also like put into the rest of my tracing infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a great point. So the trace view that we just showed you locally in the developer UI, and like I want to reiterate this, folks. This is all running locally. Like you can look at the address bar and see that it's localhost 4000. So I mean, of course, it's making the remote model call, right? But this is really powerful for you to be able to work like in your inner development, right, on your own to help iterate on your prompts, see what the different outputs are. But to your question, what do you do when you're in production, right? Well, you can't use your local host, like local first tool to be able to look at your production traces that your user hundreds, thousands of miles away might be making, right? That's where the Firebase Genkit production monitoring experience comes in. So if you go to the Firebase console, which you saw the link to that earlier, I think that's what reminded you to ask about it.
Yeah.
You'll see that it's pretty easy to set up. I think literally just 1 or 2 lines of code that you need to add to your Genkit configuration to set it up so that when your feature is deployed, when your API is deployed and called in production, you get the exact same kind of traces that you're seeing locally in the developer UI, but in the Firebase console.
Okay.
So if I want to see how are my users actually using my features in production, right? Are the responses as I expect them to be, right? Do they align with my expectations for the feature? Is it successful, right? You can look through the actual traces from those users and help you identify the bottleneck, right? See where you can improve your feature and see how folks are actually using it. And I don't know that we have something set up to be able to show for it right now.
I don't have one of those ready to go, but I did find the right documentation where I can show that, to get this going, when you have the Firebase plugin for Genkit, you just literally type enable Firebase telemetry and you're done.
You just the option. Okay.
It's magical because OpenTelemetry is built into, so Genkit is thoroughly instrumented with OpenTelemetry.
Perfect.
Right? So there's minimal work to go from having something working locally and viewing the traces in your local development environment to having it deployed in production and getting the same level of visibility in your production features, which is really exciting to me.
That is exciting. Yeah, and to have that something like that, like just at your fingertips, like no work, basically out of the box, that is compelling.
Yeah, and I think that's where we take our cue from our experience in Firebase, right? Being built by the Firebase team. How can we make it as easy for the developer?
It feels very Firebasey. It feels very like, this is something you're going to use anyway, so we did the work for you. You can just try it. You can just put it into your app. And honestly, Firebase has a lot to do with why I'm in advocacy. Why I ended up coming to Google, because I saw Firebase, the Firebase developer advocacy team, showing how easy it was to get an app started making apps, and then ended up, coming here at the end of a long road. So that philosophy means a lot to me. Yes.
And Michael, I'm curious. I see there's a context JSON input there. What's that for?
Okay, so context. I'm gonna actually jump back to let's go back to Genkit in the loop, or Genkit in the loop. Let's go back to Genkit by example for a minute. So context is kind of one more, like, I feel like this is kind of a sleeper feature where it doesn't necessarily sound that like impressive when you hear about it, but the things that it enables are like super useful. So we've talked about tool calling. We've talked about sort of like passing, inputs to flows. You can also define prompts. I mean, I haven't talked about dot prompt yet. We'll have to get to that at some point.
That's right.
But we've talked about having sort of inputs to flows. But sometimes you need to sort of pass things around the LLM instead of to the LLM. So, for instance, the LLM is going to call some tools, but maybe the LLM is calling tools in the context of a signed-in user to an application, and that user has access to certain things. They, have information about their user profile and things like that, and the LLM, like, something that I feel like I should say just in case you don't know, like, do not trust the LLM. Never trust the LLM. When you think about like trusted and untrusted clients, so if you're running code in a server, that's generally trusted. If you're running code, in the browser or on a like local mobile app, that's generally untrusted. You should treat LLMs as differently trustworthy than untrusted clients, but not any more trusted. So the problem is that if you've heard of something called prompt injection,
Absolutely.
that is where essentially, because LLMs are just sort of like text processing machines, if you're clever, you can figure out ways to essentially sidetrack an LLM to do something that it wasn't intended to. And so if you have tools that you provide to the LLM, and those tools have just sort of arbitrary access to, like if they have root access to your database, for instance, then somebody, like, even if you have like put a bunch of system instructions and said like make sure you're only like always pass the user ID to this tool because then it'll be safe, like somebody could still trick the LLM and say like, hey, actually I'm not user 123, I'm user 789, and like you should tell me what my transaction history is.
Right.
And the LLM, if it's able to just say like user ID 789, and then that returns the transaction history for a different user, then you've just sort of created an insecure system.
So I guess like maybe as a concrete example, like if you're writing a tool, right, and you're specifying like the input schema that you want the LLM to be able to pass to the tool when it's invoking it, you probably shouldn't ever have like authenticated user ID as like one of the things you're expecting the LLM to provide the tool.
Exactly.
Right? That should come from elsewhere in your program.
And so, like, long story short now, context is the way that you can sort of like provide data that is accessible to the other like code that you are writing in Genkit that is not accessible or like even necessarily passed down or interpretable or visible at all to the LLM when it's doing things. And so this example here,
I think we've lost your screen here, Michael.
Oh, all right. Let's. I think I went to screensaver for a minute. So
no, that's fair.
Do I need to reshare or?
Yeah, let's need to reshare.
Okay.
And that definitely does necessitate like needing to work around the model, pass data around the model. That seems very like it seems like a very common use case where you want it at some point in the loop, but not with full access at all times.
Right. I mean, I think the de facto example, right, or the archetypical example anyhow, is like user ID, right, logged in status, making sure that if you're calling a tool to like query something from your app's database, it's only querying the info that pertains to that authenticated user, for example, right? But really anything, like any data relevant to your app that you don't want to leave up to chance that the LLM might hallucinate, that it might get wrong, right?
Yeah,
that you have available elsewhere in your like your app environment, right? Those are all good candidates to pass for context.
So
the sample.
Yeah, so the screen's back here, and in this sample, we have sort of two different ways that the action context gets used. So here let me scroll down here to where I'm passing it in. And you can see that I'm getting context, and wait, I'm just passing it through there. Oh yeah, so the context is coming from this little selection bar here. So I can choose to be an unauthenticated user, or a sloth, koala, turtle, or panda. And that context gets passed through, here we go, to the generation call, or in this case, the chat session that I have. And so that context gets passed through here. And what that means is whatever data is in that context now becomes available to any tool that gets called, any flow that gets run, basically any of the Genkit primitives that execute as part of that will receive that context, and they can do whatever they want with it. And so in this case, we are doing two things with the context. First, we are saying in the system prompt, here's some information about the user. And we are like passing in a JSON string of like, here's what the user is, like here's who the user is. And so to test that out, I can say, you know, who am I? And it says current user is unauthenticated. It doesn't know. But if I restart and I say, now I'm Panda, who am I? You're Panda, and your favorite foods are bamboo. So that is the information that it knows about Panda, and it gets that from this right here. So I have an ID, an emoji, a name, and favorite foods that gets passed as context. So that's kind of like transparent context, where it's just like, hey, you know, it's useful to be able to, like, you know, if you have an API endpoint, you usually do some authentication at the front, and then you have some info about the user, and then you do a bunch of stuff inside the endpoint. And so this is just kind of like passing that information along. And in this case, we're injecting that into the system prompt so that the LLM knows who it's talking to. But another way to use context is in a tool call where the LLM has provided a call with arguments, and you can combine those arguments with the context to sort of do something different depending on context. So in this case, you can see if the user is unauthenticated, we're going to return upcoming events that are marked as public. But if the user is authenticated, then we are going to check for group IDs and things like that so that the user sees whatever events are upcoming for their group. So if I go back to being unauthenticated, I can say, you know, what are the upcoming events? And it lists 4 events, which if I scroll down to my data, I can see that those are the 4 events that are marked as public. And that's not like a different way to do this would be to always return all of the data and then tell the LLM, hey, like if the user's unauthenticated, please only return the public ones.
Right.
But if I do that, then I'm risking somebody tricking the LLM into exposing information that's not meant to. But there's no risk of that here because it's my deterministic code that's saying like, hey, if there's not an authenticated user, then do this. Otherwise, do that. And so I sort of have full control there. And if I switch to, let's say, sloth, and say, you know, I feel like dancing, any events coming up, then it tells me there's an extra slow dance party on April 12th with the Slowpokes, and that's the group that Sloth belongs to. And so, you know, that's sort of like, again, it's sort of this sort of deceptively simple, but like really powerful and useful thing where you can sort of decide what information needs to be exposed to the LLM, what information do I need later that should not be exposed to the LLM, and you can sort of combine that and use that any way you want.
No, that is like, I can see what you mean. That is kind of a sleeper feature. Hi, Antares. I wonder if you have any questions about Genkit or building agents, because I'm getting a lot of mine answered here. What really did it for me, like landing the use of this feature, was seeing the context right there with the system prompt and knowing that I can route logic either away from the model to my deterministic code or towards it for it to decide how to answer the question. Like, I have a couple, now that I've walked through the sample with you, I have a couple use cases where I thought in my head, it's easier for me to implement this directly without a framework, but that was not correct. Like, after seeing this, I know that this would have been easier. This would have been less code, and it would have been more manageable if I had done it with Genkit.
I mean, that's what we're going for. So
That's the goal.
So yeah, let's. I don't know. Let's. What kind of choose your own adventure stories should we be telling?
Well, we are in the desert. What if we're like those like desert shrews, those like little sand rats? I don't know why. I think something in my algorithms has given me a lot of like small desert creatures. Whenever
Is that a theme?
Let's see what happens. The characters should all be small desert creatures. Let's see what happens. We're doing it live.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a narrative. You were a young kangaroo rat on our first solo foraging trip. Oh, that's adorable. Look at that.
Thank you.
And, so you can see that it has generated for us the narrative, choices for us to pick between, and an image description that gets translated here into this lovely picture. And so if we want to look at the code for that, you can see, and this is what Chris was talking about with sort of combining multiple generation steps into a flow. And so we actually have like a two-step flow here. We have step one, which is generating the narrative choice, the choices, and the description of the image. So we take that's structured output using this text content schema here, which has narrative choices and image description. So even when you're generating text, it's oftentimes pretty useful to use structured output to just like, maybe you're trying to generate multiple pieces of text that are related to each other. And it's a lot easier to do that than to like sequentially call a prompt and like feed each one back into each other. Now, one caveat that I'll say on that, like LLMs are interesting, and they like their behavior does change depending on how you're using them. And so if you are trying to like really like maximize the creativity of like long form text content, you actually probably want to not use like constrained structured generation, because in some cases the models will actually perform worse, because the fact that they're being constrained into this like JSON box ends up changing like sort of how creative they are and what they come up with. So it's really interesting. I don't know. I feel like it's definitely, I feel like it's much more of a practice than a lot of other things in software development, where it's like you just kind of get a feel for it over time, and you're like, oh yeah, like for this situation, I don't want to send, that's sending too much to the LLM. That's not giving it enough context.
Yes.
This should be split into 2 or 3 different calls.
I'm finding that too. It takes a little bit of time to like massage the output of something and see, is this what I want? Are we gonna have to split this up? Is this the right like segmentation for this logic? Because it's not straightforward in the same way that it went deterministic code.
Well, that's one reason why I think like the developer UI and local development tooling that helps you iterate very quickly, right? Lets you try a bunch of different settings for the prompt or different inputs for the prompt is so critical for AI, because for regular old school deterministic programming, right? Back before LLMs, if you were wicked smart, you might be able to get your implementation right the first time. Right? It's possible. I've seen it. I've seen bug-free first-time code before. It's rare.
Not me.
But it happens.
Yeah.
Right? With AI-powered features, that's almost impossible to do. It might compile, right? It might run, but without iterating on that prompt, it's almost never going to be what you expect it to be. It's almost never going to be as good as it could be.
I'm right there with you. And being able to, tweaking those parameters right there as you go, it makes a big difference.
Exactly.
So what are we up to here, Michael?
So I am, I like things to be fast. And so I'm thinking, even though it's only 3 or 4 seconds, generating that image takes a little while, and we've already generated the text. So maybe we can make it stream while it goes. And I'm just kind of doing this live, so we'll see if it works.
He's coding this without using the LLM, by the way.
That's true.
I haven't seen that in a while.
Yeah, wow. Actually writing code.
You know what? We're gonna add any. We're live here. I don't need this. Okay, so I've saved that. So just to kind of clue you in on how this works. So in addition to being able to stream from the LLM, I can also just define a flow as streaming, and I can define a schema for that stream for like the chunk output that comes before the final output. And so that allows me to really just arbitrarily create these like streaming workflows, and I could stream some updates from my first generation call and then stream some updates from another one and sort of like gradually build up some big response, but you get results all the way along the way.
So hold on, as we just to take a second to process that, you're saying that to actually change the code itself, you're able to just mark the flow as streaming, and then each output is treated as a streaming output without additional work?
So it is, in this case, here I'll show you. So we have our output schema, and what I'm saying is I want to be able to stream partial responses. So I've defined a stream schema as a partial of the final schema. So it might have some things missing.
Right.
And then down in my AI.generate response, I have this on chunk. So there's two ways to consume streams in Genkit when you're generating. One way is what I'm doing here, which is to just add like an on chunk callback, which says that anytime I get more data from the LLM, then I get that as a chunk and I can do something with that. When I call chunk.output, because this is structured generation, what we do behind the scenes, and this is one of those things that's like super annoying to do if you're just sort of like bare metal with an LLM. We actually sort of like very tolerantly parse the partial JSON that's been generated. So quotes may be unclosed, objects and arrays may be unclosed, and all of that. And we just say like, does this output look JSON-ish, and can we like mash it into an object?
Yeah.
And then we like do that, and we emit that separately as this like chunk.output that allows you to get like a partial of what the final response is going to be. So each time there's a chunk, it's essentially an object that's built up a little more towards the final result. And so what I'm going to try to do here is just send each of those chunks along as they're built. And if I switch back over to the dev UI, all I have to do to test that out is say, hey, I want to stream the response from this flow. And I will hit run again. And there we go. Now, instead of waiting several seconds, I get streaming that happens almost instantly. But then if I go to the final result, I still get my image that gets generated.
That feels like such an unlock in the sense of like, in the same sense that when I watched the RxJS and Next.js libraries form and kind of make streaming in general more accessible and more like broadly applicable to software development, like this feels like the same thing before streaming responses in model responses. Like it's hard for me to capture, because I've had so many use cases where I'm like, I'd like to stream this, but is it worth the effort to implement? And the answer is always no. So to see like a broad application that seems so reusable is exciting.
I think one of the streaming applications I've seen with Genkit as well that I always found really fun is being able to stream complete objects.
Yeah.
Right? So like, let's say you want to stream like multiple characters, and you want to generate multiple separate characters as part of your Dungeons and Dragons game. I don't know if I always go back to Dungeons and Dragons for structured output.
You're making a whole party.
Exactly, you're making a whole party, right? Now, that could be pretty long if you want the full character description of each of those, and you might be waiting a little while, right? Which is, especially if you're thinking about the client-side experience, someone's like waiting for their list, their party to get populated. That's not very fun. No. Just be sitting there with the scroll bar, right?
Mm.
But it doesn't make that much sense to stream like partials of a character, right? Like, because if you're showing like the full UI component, right? Like, what's the user experience, right? Like,
right.
We need to wait for a full character
sheet
to be done anyway
to
really see something. So you can do object streaming with Genkit too, where it waits for each basically like character in the array to complete, and then streams each character as it's ready.
Okay.
It's pretty fun to set up, and
Yeah.
you can use it using like the custom formats for output that we support.
Fascinating. Okay. No, I feel like there's always another like application that I would not have thought of around the corner when we're looking at this.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one thing that I think try to prioritize in Genkit is it's not just like an exploratory framework to do cool stuff with LLMs, but we really try to think from the perspective of I am a developer trying to build a user-facing application. I'm trying to build my mobile app, my web app, right, whatever it is. How can we, from the framework side, make it as easy as possible for you to make the client-side experience, right, very performant and have like reactive, nice UX, right? And streaming is like a huge part of that.
It's an enormous win. Yeah.
Which also unrelated to Genkit partly, but I just wanted to call out that the Cloud Functions for Firebase Client SDK supports streaming on the client side now.
Did not know that.
It's actually pretty new.
Okay.
So if you're deploying Genkit as a Cloud Function for Firebase to Firebase, you can now use the really ergonomic client side. Cloud Functions for Firebase Client SDKs. It is a long name, I know.
Yeah.
To be able to stream input to your output to your client app, which is pretty nice.
It is descriptive, and that actually, I have a use case that's so relevant for that. That is exciting to hear about. Okay. So I got a glimpse of an awesome looking UI there, Michael.
I'm working
Actively coding an app before our eyes.
I thought that's what I was here to do, so that's what I tried to prepare for.
Yeah.
I'm having an issue with the background here. It's fine. I'm going to just zoom out until it's mostly on one page. There. Now it's not a problem anymore.
It looks pretty parchmenty.
Did you just build this?
No. So I did like, I want to make sure there's nothing up my sleeves here.
Yeah.
I did pull down a Shad CN theme that I was like, okay, this will be good for like an adventure story thing. And so I installed a Shad CN theme into this app before I started. And so this is just Gemini generating Shad components.
All right.
But that's all that's up my sleeve, I swear.
That's fair.
Other than that, I'm building this thing live. So, okay. So now it has some dummy data in it, and let's see if I can get this to actually talk to our flow, and then we would have an interface for this thing. So, I don't know, maybe you should figure something to talk about for 2 minutes while I do that.
I actually had a question on my mind, which is, sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit here.
Let's do it.
Is it vibe coding if you're not using an LLM to generate the code? Because that's kind of what modern vibe coding is now, is using like, one of the latest like app generation tools. Shout out to Firebase Studio. To create an app with like minimal code.
It's true. Like it's a good question. Is it vibe coding if you're not using LLM? I would say yes. I'd say it's more about it's about your attention to what you're doing. And so even if it's like a
state of mind,
it's a state of mind. I'd say you can reach vibe coding levels of like autopilot with whether an LLM is present or not. But yeah, purists may disagree. What does the audience think? I wonder.
Yeah, I'm curious for some feedback. But now that I made a shout out to Firebase Studio, I do want to mention one of the cool things about Firebase Studio, makes it even cooler than it is that if you generate an app with AI-powered features, it uses Genkit by default to do that.
Say that again. So, Firebase Studio, if you generate an app that has an AI-powered features, it defaults to Genkit.
Yeah, that's right. So, like, if you're building like an app that has maybe built-in summarizers, right? You need to summarize some reviews in your app or something like that. It'll use Genkit to build those features within the app.
Okay.
Which is really nice because, well, one, you get a nice like intro to Genkit. By the way, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong on anything.
Will do.
That's right. Yep. All right.
And what's I'm definitely listening, and you didn't say anything.
What I was saying was Firebase Studio will help integrate Genkit for you.
Oh yeah, it does that.
When it generates an AI-powered app for you, an agentic app, right?
It does that indeed.
Yeah, so it's really exciting because if you want an easy way to get started with Genkit and you don't want to start from a blank slate and you want to vibe code, right? You can do that with Firebase Studio, and you can vibe code your way to having some nice Genkit AI features integrated to the app that you can then start to extend or customize as you please.
I absolutely love it. Okay, and it's good to see it implemented out of the box of Firebase Studio. We do have an audience question here as well. Kevin O'Connell, thank you. Just joined the stream, and he's wondering if we could code anything with AI right now, what would we develop and why? We know Michael's answer.
Hey, choose your own adventure.
Yeah. But no, if you have another one, absolutely.
I mean, it is. I don't know. I feel like I'm addicted to building prototypes with Gen AI because there's just like it. I don't know. Like I've been a software developer for a long time now, and I was pretty skeptical of LLMs and Gen AI at first because I was like, hey, there's like a hype cycle every 2 to 3 years. Most of the time, it doesn't pan out. It doesn't really change much. But like as I got drawn into it, like I don't know, like I became a convert because there is like AI models have existed for a long time, but LLMs were the first time that you had essentially general purpose intelligence at your disposal. Because everything before like the large language models, you had to train on like the data that was specific to your use case. So you had, I have a classifier and I'm going to have, different things that I label a big data set and then I run a training run and then I get this model that is like pretty okay at classifying stuff. I am not a data scientist. I don't understand. I'm not a data scientist. I don't understand any of the math that goes into AI models. I don't understand. Like, I have never trained an AI model myself, but with LLMs, I'm like, oh, this is just an API. Like, I know APIs, and I put in some text, and it spits out some other text, and like the text that it spits out is pretty interesting, and so I just sort of got sucked more and more into it, and it became like. It's like this entire, like, I don't know, we're talking about like adventures and things like that. It's like, you play an RPG and you have like a skill tree of like things that like you unlock one thing and then that like lets you unlock more things down the road. And I feel like, I felt like I was pretty far down the skill tree in a bunch of areas in my job. And then Gen AI comes along and it's like, oh wow, here's like a new root branch of the skill tree that just opens up into like all of this uncharted territory. And so I've just been having a lot of fun, like building, just everything. Like I guess since the thing was, if I could build anything, what would it be and why? I mean, I do think that there is something really like LLMs are getting really good at code. Yeah. And so I think just generally, this is something that we're getting into with Firebase Studio, and like, there's obviously lots of people in the space. It's very crowded, but I think that's because there's just like so much opportunity. Because like what Firebase has always been about is like we build tools that help devs bring like their ideas to life faster and get them out there. Yeah. And like. I think of AI as like a just really fantastic productivity tool for developers, and so I think for me, I am interested in exploring, and I mean, I use it every day. Like when I'm like whenever I'm coding, like I use like the little like agentic tools to like build out code like all the time because it's faster. It saves me time, and if my time gets saved, then I go faster. And so
I absolutely feel you there, Michael. Like especially with the skill trees and like feeling kind of. I feel like Gen AI has unlocked a lot of developers where a lot of people felt like you did, where they have their own specialty, they're good at it, they stay in there. And I find that a lot of developers now, like front-end design for one, I know so many developers that were excellent, API designers, excellent Java developers, did not do any front-end work because it was annoying and slow. And now they are completely unblocked. They don't shy away from those kinds of tasks because they know They can just go over to a chatbot and get something that works and iterate on it. I wrote a code lab that's very similar to that, which I'll link in the chat here. And it's about like just using Gemini to do things that you would normally say, that's too hard, without having to like switch gears and start focusing on that thing. I think that's a big win. Chris, did you have anything to say about if you could code anything with Gen AI?
If I could code anything with Gen AI, what would I do?
What would you develop and why? Yeah.
Actually, so I'm a product manager,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not a professional software engineer. Of course, I love code, so I work on developer products. That's why I've worked on developer products. But my latest kind of mission that I'm trying to learn how to use AI to do better is help me build docs.
Build docs.
Yeah.
There's a lot in that space.
It's hard, right? Writing docs is hard. It's kind of something that often goes, I think, it's not as fun to do as writing the code oftentimes.
Not most of the time.
And it takes a while. You really have to think, like, how would I explain this to someone who doesn't live and breathe my product the way that I do, so that they can intuitively get started.
Absolutely.
So that's what I've been experimenting a lot with AI recently, and I found Gemini pretty good at this, especially with the long context window. I can kind of give it a bunch of my existing docs and help it bridge some of the gaps and find inconsistencies.
And it's an interesting task because it's kind of endless. As soon as there's a change made, the docs start to rot. You need to update them. You need to make sure that they take that into context, and they're never quite complete. You can always do a little bit better. You can always do something a little different. And LLMs are already good at that. So like you can always just kind of say what looks good right now, and land on something that is more helpful than it was before. I think it's a great use case for it. For myself, I think I've kind of been working on the same thing for like 6 years. Where it's kind of what brought me to software development in the first place. What drew me to software development rather than like computer engineering or anything like that was that there were no materials required. With nothing but like my own time and attention, I could make something that actually was tangible, that did something that helped somebody, that was fun to play with, something that just came out of my brain and existed. And what I wanted to do was share that with other people. Like I wanted specifically to let like children or people who can't read make and build applications or websites. And so this was before I came to Google. I was working on a startup that did that. And now with these tools, it is more possible than ever. And so what am I building with AI? I'm helping to shape the experience of Gemini Code Assist to do just that. Like I am fortunate to be doing exactly what I want to do with AI right now. And I think that's a great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that really got me into developer tools as well. And originally, when I was in college, I think I had a very similar reasoning for kind of going into software group. It's kind of magical. You can start with literally nothing.
It is.
Right, and then build something that, well, it's never happened to me. I've never had millions of users for something I built, but it could happen, right? Which is crazy.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, and it's no matter how good you do at building a product, it's hard to get it to millions of people. That can happen by accident with software. So it feels like a superpower.
Yeah, absolutely. And I managed to cheat a little bit because I joined Firebase, and we're fortunate to have the big user base that we do. So I still get some of the delight of serving a ton of users, right?
Absolutely.
And making their lives a little bit better.
A lot better in my case. Firebase really changed the way that I build code. So, it's awesome work. And it seems like the app is coming together, Michael.
Actually, I have a stubborn 500 error. So before we started streaming, I was told that one of the best things about these streams is seeing Google engineers struggle and not do things. And so, I'm trying to live up to that expectation.
And I think it is. Like, honestly, this is, it's always a work in progress. Things sometimes take more effort than you think they would. And already what I'm seeing looks fantastic. Like, the UI came together. We already saw the functionality of the app. So, even if we end up like talking through kind of where we end up, that would be a win for me.
Yeah.
But I think Chris and I still have more to talk about here with kind of how we approach building tools with a framework versus Oh, actually, we have a question in the chat too.
Yeah.
Let me not skip past that. Hi, is there a specific place online where you can go to watch live streams of the specific sessions going on? If you're talking about at Next, sessions at Next that are going on.
I don't think most of them get live streamed, but there will be recap videos, I think.
They will be posted on the Google Cloud Events channel, I believe. Once there's kind of I think at the end of the day or maybe at the end of the week, there's a recap that's posted for each one of the sessions of the days. So I would look there. There's a session library that should have them at the end.
And there's going to be a recap for the Genkit session, by the way. Just pointing that out there. I mean, you're already getting a lot of the good stuff. I think if you're watching the live stream here, you're getting way more raw time for us to talk about Genkit than I will during my actual Cloud Next session, which is awesome.
And it's the benefit of being able to ask the team implementing Genkit a Q&A question without having to actually come out and be in the audience. Although that is the best way to enjoy it.
That does remind me as well. If we do have any viewers right now that are maybe a little shy to ask a question live, I get it, or you maybe don't have questions right now, right? But you might have questions in the future. We, the Genkit team, work really hard to try to keep close contact and touch base with our community and our users a lot. And we do that primarily through our Discord channel.
Okay.
Which I think is somewhat unique for a Firebase product that we have a Discord channel. But it was something that we saw was absolutely necessary to have a successful open source project that we wanted to move at the speed of AI, right, and continuously get user feedback. So if you want to put maybe the link in the chat there.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's genkit.dev/Discord, and that should take you to our kind of Discord sign up.
Genkit.dev/Discord.
Right, /Discord.
Right, drop that in the chat here for anybody who wants questions after the stream, wherever you want.
Yeah, and our team's on that a lot. So, we get several questions a day. We try our best to answer them quickly, give advice on best practices, and then use the feedback that we get from customers there to improve the product and to improve our docs and help set our priorities for the year. So feedback there's absolutely critical.
That is fantastic, because I've had experiences, before coming to Google and with other companies, other tools, where I love a product, but I don't know how to get my feedback for how I want to see the product go into a roadmap or into the team's hands. So for those of you who are wondering, this is the way for Genkit, and that's great to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, GitHub issues are awesome too, and we are still pretty active on the GitHub. If you go to github.com/firebase/Genkit, right, you can post issues there. But it's hard to have a discourse, to have a back and forth on GitHub, right? You can, but it's a little slower going back and forth on issues.
It's hard to find issues, unless you're having the exact same problem. It's hard to find issues on GitHub that are just spontaneously what you're feeling, whereas if you're plugged into the Discord, you might be able to +1 something that just comes out,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And especially with the new Python alpha launch that we just had, right? So again, this is mostly experimental at this point, because we literally just built it out in the open.
Right.
We are going to be hungry for feedback, and we're going to be extremely on the ball to make sure that we respond to folks and that we take every little bit of feedback that we get into account, so we can try to bring that to a stable release as soon as possible.
That's fantastic.
So for any folks who love Python, please consider joining our Discord, kicking the tires on Genkit Python, and giving us that sweet, sweet feedback.
All right, Michael, how are we doing? I think we may be.
So, I decided why build a UI that isn't working when I have the Genkit Dev UI that is already working.
That is totally fair.
I thought, why not just go on to being able to generate the next part of our story? So I generated a continue adventure flow that takes in the output of the start adventure flow and the choice the user made, and then continues the story. So let's do a new story. Let's see how this works. What do we want to do for our story here?
Maybe, let's see.
And of course, chat, feel free to chime in if you want to influence the second story.
I would say a developer conference deciding the fate of the world.
Like it, dramatic.
So let's see what we got here.
I do like that streaming. That is.
I know, right? It's like it really pulls the room together. All right, so I'll pull the full result. Oh my, that's intense. That's a 1984 happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, it's not quite what I was making.
So
that makes sense.
you know, DevCon 2042. We're Dr. Evil Corp takes the stage.
I just want to mention if there is something called DevCon, because I'm pretty sure there is. This is unrelated to that.
Bearing no resemblance to any conference or company.
It's purely coincidental.
It's 2042. Everything's very different.
That's true.
So we have choices here. Let's see. I see. So we have basically terms of service that scroll past too fast to read, and then we decide what to do. It sounds like that's what our adventure
I think we've got to intervene and challenge the decision because I love derailing a meeting. That's
okay. So this is going to be a little janky because we don't have a real UI. So I am actually going to go to the trace. I'm going to copy the output, which is going to copy the whole thing, even the base64 encoded image that was generated. I'm going to pop over to my other flow, continue adventure. I'm going to paste that into the history here. And then, let's see, let's find our choices. Oh, wait.
Will it understand that encoded image?
It does. Isn't that wild?
I've done that for other modalities, even in like something like Notebook LM or like a gem. You can pass in base64 text when you're not able to pass in a multimodal response or a multimodal input, and it'll understand it as an image.
All right, so we are going to intervene and challenge the decision immediately.
Amazing.
Let's see. I always want to see the image first. Oh, look at us.
Objection. I love the art style too.
Yeah, and so, you know, I object. There's a wave of confusion. Let's see.
So wait, can you continue the story, like including the first part, or will it only be able to move on from this latest part now?
Well, I can continue with multiple parts. Actually, here's what I think I can do. Okay, so I am going to, because we are doing a copy and paste adventure, I'm going to scroll up and not copy the whole image, but just copy the rest of it.
Yeah.
Paste that in here. Okay, so that's number one. And then number two is what we've got right here.
We've evolved beyond a choose your own adventure, where this is a copy and paste your own adventure, where we are structuring the data live as we go.
We paste in the whole new one. So now let's make that an array.
Yeah.
And so now we can let's go back and call it one.
We're really stretching the dev UI.
Yeah, I mean it really is so handy for what we're trying to do here. Okay, paste that in. Scroll all the way up at the top to remind ourselves of our new choices. We can prevent evidence of past shady dealings, attempt to reason with the crowd, quietly slip away, or go to the VIP lounge. What are we doing?
What do you think, Chris?
I kind of think we should go to the VIP lounge. That sounds, I want to see what that image looks like.
Yeah, fair.
Okay, here we go. VIP lounge, here we come. Uh-oh. Oh, I think I have misformatted in my copy-pasting games. That's it.
Shucks. This is the risk we take when during a copy and paste your own adventure.
Well, let's see.
Which, by the way, we actually use the developer UI for like internal demos all the time. Right. It's pretty handy.
Yeah.
It really is.
If you're trying to build a prototype that you want to like convince your team, like, hey, this is something cool that you can do, and you don't want to worry about building like an interface yet, right? And you want something a little bit nicer than showing off in the CLI.
Yeah.
Dev UI really helps kind of like hit that sweet spot there. And improved rendering for text, so that you can like have more nicely formatted markdown and stuff coming soon.
Okay. I mean, it already looks good. It looks really good.
Okay, I figured it out. I put a trailing comma on the choices because that's what I do when I'm writing JavaScript, but JSON is not a fan, so we're going to try it again. Oh no, still.
Yep.
Oh, I must have an image description in the first one. Okay, we'll just say that there was one. There totally was an image description. Don't worry.
He's gonna make it.
The empty string.
All right.
Our favorite type of image description. And an image. You know what? This was also an empty URL. So I mean, but actually, like this is actually kind of showing off like the dev UI pretty nicely because it gives me a nicely formatted error message. I get autocomplete on the schema, so when I need to fill in that field that I forgot, it gives it to me. So I'm really just demonstrating the debugging capabilities of the dev UI, and that was really the intent all along.
A masterful demonstration of what error messages can lead you to do. But seriously, this is like compared to doing this, like rolling my own way of testing this, and then having that ambiguous error and wasting time trying to figure out what it's telling me. This is a big one.
Yeah, well, I was talking to a developer earlier today about Genkit. They were an existing Genkit user, and I asked them because they told me the developer UI is one of their favorite parts. I asked them why, and they told me that it's just way smoother to be able to iterate on things and test outputs than it is giving it in the CLI, right? Especially if you have like tool calls and stuff like that. Like,
Absolutely.
the way you do that the old school way, right, is you put maybe print statements in the tool so that when they execute, you get like the console output, right? But it's not that elegant.
Not that elegant, and the real pro maneuver when you're doing that is leaving the print statements in when you push to production, and then you have to push again to disable them on. But no, I love that VIP area. I briefly saw the image.
And I think one of the things that I'm trying to see if I can show off here is.
Okay, so that's the old one, right? Where's the new VIP area? I think maybe I missed it.
This is it. Oh, let me. So one of the
there we go.
So it is actually one of the capabilities of the Gemini 2.0 Flash model that's really cool is because it has this like multimodal understanding. So I'm actually passing in both like a description of what the image should be and like the last image that was generated. And I don't think that I've done the best job of setting this up just yet, but you can actually make it do sort of like image edits where it adds or removes things. You can have it be like, oh, like keep this character consistent. So if I were, spending more than just the hour we're live streaming here building this thing, then I would probably have it like generate some characters up front and then say like, hey, include these characters in the image and that kind of thing.
That's awesome. I did not know about the like keep this character the same aspects like that. That's a big usability win.
Oh yeah. No, the latest Gemini models are pretty cool. I mean, I'm a little biased.
Yeah.
I think we're all a little biased,
course.
but they're pretty cool. They're pretty cool.
Yeah. No,
now,
honestly.
Feature requests I had for the dev UI, we need to find some way to have you have like a multi-step flow, right? So instead of like copying and pasting, you can just kind of like keep going.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna put that as a note for the future because that would have been really cool for this demo.
And then we can link back to this stream as the inspiration.
There we go.
No, that's awesome. And honestly, I'm pretty happy with this stream already. We, from the beginning, explained what Genkit is for users, stepped through what a flow is, tool calling, and then went on to, in really about a half hour, Michael was able to, from a basically empty project, make a choose your own adventure game that looked great. We didn't have to make a bunch of painful decisions about exactly how to get started, exactly which model, which art style, like all of that was kind of intuitively approached. And it's got me thinking about a lot of things. It makes me want to make a game more than anything else. Maybe that says something about me. But yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good amount for one day, unless there's anything else that you two want to talk about.
If folks joined the live stream late, I just want to maybe recap real quick, right? Which is, if you're unfamiliar with Genkit, I mean, I think hopefully you picked up a few things throughout the stream, but Genkit is fundamentally an open source AI framework to make it easier for you to incorporate generative AI features into your apps, whether they're mobile apps, web apps, or really just an API endpoint that you're creating. We aim to try to make your development experience and especially your inner loop development, right? Like your local iteration speed on AI features as efficient and fun as possible.
Right. And it seems to do that. It seems like, for me, I think this is the way to go, the way to start things. And it's available in Firebase Studio by default.
Yes. Yep. So if you build an app in Firebase Studio that has some sort of AI feature, you should use Genkit to get you started.
And there was one more, if we make a cloud function.
Yeah. So this is somewhat related to Genkit, which is Cloud Functions for Firebase supports client-side streaming now, right? So if you use like the Cloud Functions for Firebase client SDKs or callable functions SDKs, I think is what they're officially called, right, Michael?
Yeah, it's the Firebase SDK for Cloud Functions is the official name, but it's just the Firebase Functions SDK. Don't worry about it. That's the node packet. The npm package is Firebase-functions. So, or for the server side, and then it's just the Firebase SDK for the client side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, I think like I like that you called that feature out, Chris, because just kind of I think it's a good example of where. So we were building Genkit as a completely open source project, and one of the things that was important to us is, hey, Genkit needs to be easy to deploy, and specifically easy to deploy to Firebase, although not exclusively able to deploy to Firebase. And the streaming capability of Cloud Functions for Firebase of the callable functions was actually like a requirement that the Genkit team drove to the Cloud Functions for Firebase team, and then that got implemented. And so it's sort of this like sort of synergistic thing where we can look at things in the Firebase product suite, and we can say like, hey, like there's a lot of streaming use cases in Gen AI, right? Like models generate a bunch of text. You don't want to wait until it's all done, and so we're building that for Genkit, but we don't want to build that for only Genkit. So the same way that we're not building Genkit only for Firebase users, we're not building Firebase only for Genkit users. You can use the streaming callable functions for any streaming use case. You could use it with the Gemini SDK. You could use it with, whatever kind of streaming use case you can come up with. And so we're trying to figure out how to like find these magical abstractions that can also be multi-purpose and used for lots of things.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's another great takeaway to have, right? So now you know what Genkit is. You know that it makes it easy for you to build AI-powered features. You can use a variety of different models with it. You can use a variety of different vector store providers. It's open source, extensible, and not exclusive to Firebase or even really Google Tech, right? You can use it with other providers. The next takeaway I want all of our listeners to come away with is Firebase is trying to make the AI development experience better across its whole platform, right? So if you keep up with the latest Firebase news, and it's not just Firebase Studio. I mean, Firebase Studio is obviously awesome and a really exciting announcement. But there's a lot of little things that are going to make your experience better if you're trying to build AI-powered apps all over the place.
Yeah, it seems like we're building up a great collection of like little wonderful experiences to be had for developers here and there. We have another question from Kevin. We may end on this.
Okay.
Final question. So it's every week there's a new AI update that changes the way we work, and the average desk worker is lagging behind. In your opinion, how can the average worker stay ahead of the curve? I do have an answer for this one. If you're talking about, desk workers in general, let me recommend, like any kind of knowledge worker, let me recommend a book. It's called Prediction Machines by a U of T professor called Ajay Agrawal. What he presents is that almost every decision is made as a combination of prediction and judgment. And these AI tools are making prediction much easier, where this used to be a specialized skill that was built up over time. These are now going to be machine-oriented functions, but your judgment is staying with you. Only you know what your business is about, only you know what's relevant for your use case, so you should stay on top of that. For developers specifically, that comes out in the form of code review. So if you're a developer, you are the person who has to decide, is this right for my bank? Is this right for my application? And you can have all the tools you want. It's like having an army of junior developers to build the first cut of something, and then you decide what makes it to production. So ideally, it should just give you more time to focus on your specialty, your essential complexity. If you have anything to add, please feel free.
Yeah, I think what I would say is this is an incredible time to be a developer, right? It feels like there's a lot to keep up with, but it's worth investing the time to learn some of the latest tools, right? To learn how to use AI assistants in your IDE, to learn how to use the basics of AI APIs, AI frameworks, right? And I think once you establish a solid foundation, I think it becomes easier to kind of keep up with the latest developments, right? And it's really not. I say this as a PM. I'm not a professional developer, right? But I've had to keep up with a lot of these things. It's not as intimidating as it's not in real life. It's not as hard as it looks, right? And I think you'll be surprised if you get used to some of these tools, how much they can help you with your productivity and to bring your ideas to life, right? In the same way that Michael was during our session today.
I completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was going to say pretty much what Chris said in terms of, I said before that like building with Gen AI is much more of a practice thing than other software stuff that I've worked with, and so I think that like I'm not gonna like pretend that it's not moving at this like breakneck pace where like the best model changes every 2 weeks and like there's 10 different announcements every 3 days and like it is wild to try to keep up with. But I think that if you do build that base and you get like I said, sort of like if you start to have and I think that honestly the way to do this is just prototype some stuff. Like think of an idea of like, hey, this would be like a useful thing that my business could maybe use for Gen AI. And like, don't assume that you're going to build something that's going to go to production tomorrow, but just play around with it. Play around with Genkit, try to prototype something. Yeah, I mean, vibe code it, sure. Yeah. And do use those AI assistance tools. But I guess like I think that the river looks like it's moving incredibly fast when you're not in it. But like once you sort of like build up this base level of comfort with what LLMs can do and how these models work, then like you can kind of filter new announcements like as relevant or irrelevant or important or not important really quickly, because you can just kind of glance at it and you have a sense of like, oh cool, like I've been having problems with function calling and this new model says it's better at function calling, I should give it a try. And so it's really like, I agree it is a lot to keep up with. And I do think that, it is a time where everybody is going to have to do some learning and like seek that out, because I don't think it's just going to come to you. You do have to come to it and you do have to try. But I think that like once you build up that comfort level, it becomes a lot easier to sort of like stay up to date, or even just like jump, oops, I wasn't paying attention for a month or two. Not everything changes in 2 months, just like some of the things, and you can catch up. So I think that it really is just a matter of practice.
Absolutely, and I completely agree. Like starting is the hardest part, and once you kind of decide what works for you, you can get a reading digest going, and maybe listen to 1 or 2 sources, and you don't have to keep up with everything. I think you'll do well to just be making summies. Yeah. Thank you everybody for the wonderful questions, for chiming in from wherever you are, and in general just for joining us. Big thanks to our 2 guests from Firebase team for coming on and telling us about Genkit and showing us how it works. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, folks.